Good evening, it's Graham from Unearthed, and this particular film I'm attempting to do today is named Faces from the Past. Now you might think to yourself, what's all that about? And I was detecting yesterday and I decided to come up with the idea of showing some of the things that you unearth out of the ground with busts, faces, portraits, you name it. So when we're out detecting in fields and we find coins and artifacts, sometimes you're rubbing the mud off to reveal a portrait. And here's one example, which is a Roman denarius. And you can see it's got a rather nice portrait on it. So the Romans were very proud people, the emperors were very proud people. They wanted to showcase their portrait on the coins to make them look the best. Powerful, it'll give off a message, I guess, to the masses that this guy means business. Bold looking, and the first thing we do as detectorists is try to reveal the portrait. So there's one particular Roman coin. If I remember rightly, it's Septimus Severus. Some of you guys might call me out on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. So, the portraits are through the ages, are very, very important. They're on almost everything. So that's one particular portrait, as you can see. And then through the ages, we have different portraits. So here's one, which is a short cross penny of Richard the Lionheart. And as you can see, there's a portrait of a king looking back at me. You can just make out his face holding a sceptre. That line across there is his sceptre. There would have been a little hand in that bottom corner. His two eyes, his little beard and mouth, and his crown, and he's peering back at me. But you think about it, over the centuries when these coins were in circulation, that would have been the image of the king that everybody's seen. The peasants working in the field and the serfs and whatever else would never have seen the king. Very, very rare that they would have even got a glimpse of the king unless they were lucky enough to be in a city that the king was visiting at a particular time. So that was the only image they had of the king. So you can imagine the children looking at that and thinking, wow, that king looks ugly. Or he looks a bit strange. But that's the only image that they got because there was no photographs in them days. There was no postcards, photographs or anything like that. Images, videos, nothing. And that was probably the only chance that they got to look at their king at the time. But of course, the short cross reign, Henry II, Richard I, King John, and Henry III were pretty much the same as that. So the kings must have all looked the same to them in their imagination. So that's another portrait that's looking back at us, as you can see. Like I said, they played a big part, did the portraits. A little bit later on in time, and I do apologise if I'm moving this camera around. I'm trying to keep as still as possible because I'm slightly perched on a chair, so I do apologise. Henry VIII. Now this is a side portrait of the king with his crown, as you can see, with his hair, and it gives us a glimpse of the past. It gives us almost a photograph of the past when we look at these coins. So did the king look like that? Well, he must have looked something like that, because if he wasn't happy with his coins being struck or his portraits being struck on his coins, he would have probably told them to, go back and remake them or redo them. So that is probably a pretty good description of what he would have looked like way back in the 1500s. 1500s. So that's Henry VIII, that's a groat. And, again, the children that would have looked at these coins way back then would have seen the portrait of the king and pretty much thought that's what he looked like. That was probably our equivalent to photographs of today. So quite amazing when you think about it. And, of course, it changed again. So Henry VIII's son, the boy king, this is a full portrait, face on. As you can see, I'm going to put that down so you can get a better look at this. And that's a shilling, a boy king shilling. And as you can see, his face, he's got his crown there. Pretty good portrait, I would guess. It's a bit worn, the portrait's a bit worn. Even though it's a cracking coin, and the only one I've ever had. It's slightly worn on his face, which is a shame. So you can just make out his eyes and his face and everything else, and his garment that he's wearing with all the decoration on, pretty much of the theme of the time. So that's an interesting one. Again, that's almost like a photograph of the past. It's the only images that we would have seen, or the people at the time would have seen, of the Boy King, apart from paintings, I guess, in galleries or in other places. So that's the portraits on coins, which is quite an interesting subject, I guess. And of course we have them on Queen Mary, and we have them on Elizabeth and all the kings. Some of them very crude, the early ones. The later ones got a little bit better. Charles, James, the list goes on, and right into the milled coinage. So that's a glimpse of, if I can get hold of the coin, the Boy King himself, Edward. You can actually see his face a little bit better there, as you can even see one of his ears. So, but portraits weren't just left to coinage. So I was detecting yesterday, as I said, I managed to winkle this out on rough plough. And as you can see, it's a figure. And now he's either playing a flute, or he's smoking a pipe, or he may have something over his back, and it's gone through round his back and it's broken off. But I don't think so. I think he's probably smoking a pipe, playing a flute. But it's, it's probably Georgian in date, 18th century. What it's been, I don't know. It's quite thick. It's not cast. It still needs a clean. Maybe a pipe tamper. But it gives us an idea of what the people looked like back then. The dress, he's got a coat on, as you can see. He's got a hat on to keep his head warm. Absolutely tantalising glimpses of the past. That to some people, especially the children of the day, would have been quite something. They hadn't, they didn't have the toys that we had as children. These things would have been quite of interest to them when they were playing with them, I guess. So that's another portrait, or a description of a figure from the past that we can glean information from. Poor fellow's lost his feet, and looks like he's lost his arm as well, so he's not in the best of condition. But we go back further in time and we get things like this, which is medieval in date, quite early, and it's of a bishop. Now we can see his crude face there. He's got an eye, nose and a mouth. He's got his arms crossed, but he's wearing a robe. So, it gives us an idea of the clothing garments that they used to wear way back in the Middle Ages. He has his bishop helmet, or whatever it's called, on, but it's broken. There is a name for it, but I can't remember what it is, so I do apologise. So there's another example of a face looking back at us from the past. And the list goes on and on. So here's another one that I found a few years back, which is Romano-British. Found off a Romano-British site where there was Celtic, Iron Age and Roman artefacts and coins coming to light. And this is actually a figure, as you can see. He's got his face looking at us. It looks like a little piece of Lego, doesn't it? A Lego man. But it's interesting because they've given him no mouth. Just his eyes and his nose. He's got some sort of helmet on, as you can see. Or is it his hair? I would say, I'm pretty much convinced that's got to be a helmet of some sort. But it was actually a knife handle. So if you can look at the bottom, that's iron there where the remains of the knife would have come from. But there's another example of a figurine with a face looking back at us, again from the past, 2,000 years ago. Very interesting. And of course he's got some sort of garment on, as you can see, a decorated garment of some description. And again, the children that would have had this and others would have, it would have been quite interesting for them to look at and play with, I guess. And so it's another interesting find from the past. Now, this is a particularly interesting one. I found that earlier this year. Now, as you can see, it's made of lead. It's quite heavy. It's a head of a man. Now, at the time, I actually found this in amongst a smattering of bronze Roman coins. So I automatically thought, that's got to be Roman. That little head Must be a Roman. There was Roman material all over the place. There was pottery, there was coin scatters. I think I got 7 or 8 Roman coins in a very small area. Right in the middle of that, this came up. However, when I've done some research, turns out to be, I think, a tobacco lid. 18th century tobacco lid. Now, I'm not sure what it is or who it's meant to be. I think they class it as a Negro's head. After some research that I did, I think one of the guys on Instagram that follows me found one very similar, but I'm quite intrigued by it. I think it's quite an interesting little find. He's got a little squashed nose there, as you can see. You know, also looks like a monk, doesn't it? Almost like a friar, almost like what Friar Tuck would have looked like. But I'm pretty sure the identification of an 18th century tobacco lid would be right. But it goes to show also that it doesn't matter what material is around you, what you're digging up coinage wise. Just get a proper identification on. Because for a matter of weeks and weeks, I thought this was Roman. It was only after I put it up on my Unearthed Instagram account, our channel on Instagram, that somebody actually came back to me and said, "Hey, I found one." And the FLO finds layers, an officer told me it was 18th century. So, you know, sometimes we can be fooled by these little artifacts, and I was certainly fooled by this one. But it's nonetheless, it's still a desirable find. Even though it's not Roman, I'm still really pleased with it. It's one of the first one I've ever had. But it just goes to show what you can find. Even though it was mixed in with a load of Roman material, turns out to be much, much later. And of course, lastly, there's this little clay figurine which I've showed before on one of my other YouTube films. This is made of clay, and sadly she's broken. Almost looks like the Widow Twankey, doesn't it? But it gives you an idea of it. Again, she's smiling, she's got the face, the nose is there, the eyes, she's got the hood. It looks like she might have been holding a staff here. She's got a bow around her neck, and it looks like a cloak. So it gives us an idea, again, this little ornament, of how people looked in the past, what they worn, little faces looking back at you, little hair under the hood. Fascinating. So the next time you guys are out detecting and you find the coins, you've got to think back at, you're looking at the portrait on some of them. You've got to think that the people of the day were also looking at them portraits, and it might have been the only image that they saw of their king or queen. Other than that, they probably didn't know what it looked like. So there you go. She actually stands up. There you go. That's what I was trying to do. I hope that's been of interest. Slightly different theme this time, but probably still as interesting as some of the coinage and artifacts ones that we've done in the past. Lastly, I would like to say, if I don't do another video before Christmas, all the best to everybody, and thanks very much for following me on YouTube and some of the other social media outlets. We're hoping for many more interesting films coming up in 2019, and a big thank you to our customers as well. Without you guys, we wouldn't be doing this. Unearthed wouldn't exist. So all the best, have a great Christmas and a happy new year. I'll catch you soon.